These are the Auburn football players that will matter the most in 2024.
You are Locked On Auburn, your daily podcast on the Auburn Tigers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Yes, welcome on into Locked On Auburn, your daily Auburn Tigers podcast. I am Lindsay Crosby, filling in for Zac Blackerby, who is out of the country. You saw him on yesterday's episode. You'll see him again a little bit later this week. I am, writer for AuburnDaily.com, as well as a million other things. Joined by Montgomery radio legend Darrell Dapprich, here to talk about Auburn football in 2024. And Dap, what I really kind of want to do, on Monday, we talked about the games, right, that we're hyped about, that we're excited about, and did a little bit of a ranking. And I like that we had some different answers and we had some different perspectives. And I kind of want to go back to that well today and look at the most impactful players in 2024. We'll start with the offense. We'll probably do a couple segments of the offense and catch one of the defense at the end there. But to start off with, I want to know your number one most impactful offensive player in the 2024 season.
Yeah, what's great about this list, Lindsay, is I struggled to come up with some. And that goes to show you that the roster is getting replenished and getting, because they're not like all these obvious choices like they were during the Great Potato Famine and other times where you could just pluck them like a potato out of the ground, a spud. I had a hard time coming up with this list, and that's a good thing. But I think
Speaking of potato famine, he responded to an Auburn beat writer on Twitter the other day. Dude, stop searching your name. Just let it go, man. We paid you to go away. Go away. Okay, you're number one.
Social media so much, yeah. My number one is Jarquez Hunter, and I vacillated back and forth between this, but I truly believe that as much as the receiver room has been improved and how much Auburn's gotten the incoming freshmen and the transfer portals, guys, I still think that the strength of this team is the running back room on offense and running the football. I think that the running back room is great. They're deep. So I just feel like even though the passing game is going to be improved, and you'll probably see a ratio increase run to pass on the pass side, I still think, Lindsay, Auburn's bread is going to be buttered with the running game, and I look for Jarquez Hunter to have a very big year.
Oh, I love that we didn't go back and forth over these before we started, because I don't have running back number one. I don't think I have running back in the top three, because here's the thing, and you said this in there. You said a couple times, running back room, and you said how deep the running back room was. And so I agree. I think Jarquez Hunter's a special player. I'm excited. He's the RB1 this year, but I don't know if the difference in Jarquez Hunter and Jeremiah Cobb and Damari Alston is significant enough for him to be the number one most impactful guy. Because I think if you were to take Jarquez Hunter out and plug in Cobb, plug in Alston, somebody like that, I think you could probably get 85, 90, 95% of the same production. For me, my number one most impactful player for Auburn's offense in 2024, it's got to be Peyton Thorne. There's just, when you look at the schedule that you're going to play, all these conference games, you avoid the LSU, you avoid Ole Miss and Mississippi State, but you have Oklahoma, things like that. The biggest thing here that's going to give Auburn improvement over what they did last season is better play from the quarterback position. And kind of to your point, I feel like there's a floor with the running game, right? Like, no matter what, you're going to be able to move the ball because you have such a good running back room. But if Peyton Thorne can't be more consistent on early downs, if he can't be more consistent getting chunk plays, if he can't be more consistent on the road with completions, I think that's where you really end up hitting a ceiling with your offense. And to me, the difference in Auburn is not necessarily the floor and where the floor is, but it's where the ceiling is. And in the SEC in 2024, that's absolutely going to be tied to the strength and the quality of your quarterback play. So for me, Peyton Thorne is the most impactful player for Auburn football, because if Peyton Thorne doesn't have it, if he's not there in 2024, it severely lowers the ceiling of this offense compared to what it could be if he is playing up to his potential.
Yeah, and I have him, spoiler alert, I do have him in my top 5, and I have him pretty high. And you almost got me to sway my vote, man. You were so convincing right there.
Thank you.
You need to be on a debate team, an alumni debate team, because there were some really good points there. The depth of the running back room, meaning that one guy can't make that much of an impact, you almost had me. Really, really good point there. No, that was a good point. It's probably why I have 2 running backs in my top 5. My second is Cam Coleman. And again, when I do these lists, sometimes I go back and forth and hesitate and second guess myself. Only based upon the fact that you just don't want to put the expectations so high and so unrealistic on a true freshman. But I just think he's going to have that kind of impact on this offense. I really do. I think he is going to be the second most impactful offensive player, offensive weapon, as far as making a difference for this offense, based upon everything that we've gone over time and time again, you, me, Zach, others on the show, what we saw as a glimpse in the A-Day game. I think he's going to just elevate the receiving room. He's going to help Peyton Thorne be more of an impactful player. You like that segue? And I have him at 2. I have him at 2.
I really think the Cam Coleman, and kind of spoiler here, I have him on this top 5 as well. I think the thing for Cam Coleman is his adjustment to college football, to the conference, to college, all that stuff. I think that really impacts, by the end of the season, where is Auburn's offense? How explosive are they? I guess, to go back to my original thing, I guess he's probably the ceiling of the offense, right? If he can end up being what we think he could be, then the ceiling of this offense does dramatically raise because you have an explosive threat outside. But my number 2 is actually a little bit different, and it kind of undercuts my last argument. KeAndre Lambert-Smith's my number 2. And for me, it's because so much of your offensive production when it comes to the passing game is we're kind of banking on a lot of these youngsters, right? We're talking about Bryce Kane. We're talking about Cam Coleman. We're talking about Perry Thompson, and all that kind of stuff. And KeAndre Lambert-Smith is your guy along with Robert Lewis, who has been a Power 5 starter and understands how to do it already in college. And so he's going to be the guy, and this is going to be the hard one to evaluate, because I think he's going to provide you some early season stability because he understands how to get open against college defensive backs and things like that. But I think so much of what he could do also is to be that veteran mentor guy who has, he understands how to prep for a Saturday game and how to use the film to get ready and how to study tendencies of a college defense and all of that stuff. And so I think KeAndre Lambert-Smith, it can be a production perspective. It can be what he can actually do. But I think it can also be what he can teach a Cam Coleman, what he can teach a Bryce Kane, and a lot of these youngsters, a Sam Jackson converting over to receiving after being a college quarterback. I think that that's probably going to end up being rather impactful. We just may not see all of his impact in the stats of his in 2024.
I like that choice, and I really can't comment much on what you said because he's in my top 5, and a lot of the reasons that you gave, I'll reiterate and add a few, but I agree with that. He's definitely going to be impactful. I think the biggest thing you said that stuck out to me that when I get to him is it'll not just be statistics. It won't just be the stats you see on the field, but his impact will be felt throughout the receiver room for leadership, mentoring, and that kind of thing as well. So,
yeah. All right. So in just a second, we're going to get to numbers 3 through 5 in just a moment. But first, today's episode is brought to you by our friends at FanDuel. Right now, time of year, it is winner take all time in the NBA, in the NHL. FanDuel gives you a shot to bring home a big win of your own. Right now, new customers get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. It's $150. You can spend it on spreads, money lines, player props, and more. You visit FanDuel.com/lockedon. You can make your shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. But Auburn is over under 7.5 wins. And it's, as of time of recording, 7 wins minus 154 for the under. If you want the over on 7.5 wins, it's plus 124. And so, Darrell, do you think 7.5 is a good number? And do you think it's right for the favorite on that to be under 7.5?
No, I think it should be over, but 7.5 is a really good number that they set. I mean, that's what I would have chose, because it's such a number that a lot of people, I mean, you get 8 is probably what people feel like, Auburn's going to do this year as far as wins. And so 7.5, they know what they're doing. And yeah, I agree with that number wholeheartedly.
All right. So FanDuel.com/lockedon. If you think that number is maybe a little bit low, if you think that over is easy money, FanDuel.com/lockedon. Make your shot count with FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook. Lindsay, Crosby, Darrell, Dapprich filling in for the traveling Zac Blackerby, who is in international waters right now, but we'll still have a nice message for you on Friday. And we're going over the top 5 most impactful players for Auburn's offense in 2024. Jarquez Hunter, Cam Coleman was the 1 and 2 for Darrell. I had Peyton Thorne and KeAndre Lambert-Smith as my 1 and 2. Darrell, what is your number 3 most impactful player for Auburn's offense in 2024?
It's Peyton Thorne. And for a lot of the reasons you said, not to take an easy way out, it's just, it's really very like-mindedness. I agree with you. And I think the biggest takeaway is he better be one of the most, if he's not, then I'll change my mind completely on that FanDuel question you just asked me. I think that the weapons that were given to Peyton Thorne this year, the weapons that he already had coming back in the running back room, the offensive line maturing, adding Percy Lewis, but the guys that were there getting another year of experience, getting coached up. He's got everything he needs to be an impactful player in 2024. And I believe he will be, with his legs and his arm. I think he'll make a difference. He'll have improved stats. And as long as his stats improve and he does some things that he's capable of doing, it's going to be a huge impact. But I think he's got the tools in the tool belt now around him. And so I fully expect him to be a player. And I have him 3rd as the most impactful offensive players for Auburn.
Yeah, and for me, it kind of comes down to consistency, right? Like, he's got to be more consistent on a play-to-play basis, a game-to-game basis, a home-to-road basis. I feel like that's been a big one, is on the road. On that note of kind of stability and for Peyton Thorne, a little outside the box here, but my number 3 most impactful offensive player for Auburn is center Connor Lew.
That's a good one.
Because so many schools in this conference look to have pretty decent defenses. And you have to go on the road, right? You have to go to Alabama, historically good defense. You have to go to Georgia. The defense was so good that the entire defense is now in Philadelphia playing for the Eagles. Like, really good defense teams. And so Connor Lew setting protections, Connor Lew and Peyton Thorne working together to change protections, identify blitzers, all that kind of stuff. That's going to be really big for Auburn, because it all kind of comes back to Peyton Thorne has to feel comfortable. And so if him and Connor Lew together can't get the protection set, that's going to limit the ceiling of the offense. And so Connor Lew's got to be on his game. And he same thing. You won't have a ton of direct stats that said Connor Lew did this. But I think when you go back and you look at pressures, you look at sacks, things like that, you'll see the impact of Connor Lew and the offensive line as a whole in 2024. But it's all kind of gone down to the guy in the middle, the youngest player of them all, in Connor Lew, and his setting the protections.
And I don't really, as far as looking past something or really just downplaying how much better it looked like the offense played last year when Connor Lew got inserted into the lineup after Avery Jones got hurt. I mean, there wasn't a drop-off. So,
right.
From a pass protection standpoint, obviously it's not as important as your left tackle, but there's so many different things that he does to set the tone, or a center does to set the tone on the offensive line, and he will impact the run game and the pass game. So that's a good one. I'm very high on him. I think he will be Auburn's highest drafted offensive lineman in a long time when he finally comes out and declares for the draft.
I think he'll eventually end up being a Remington Award candidate, if not a winner there. Okay, number 4. Want to hear what you have for number 4.
KeAndre Lambert-Smith. We're similar, but I dropped him. I think the impact is going to be on the field early. Mm-hmm. A guy that you can count on that's been through the wars, so to speak, in the Big Ten. Reminds me of a Coleman that Peyton Thorne, when he looked his best, had as an option to throw to. I'm not saying that he's as good as Coleman, who was a high draft pick with the Bills, but I think he's talent special. Look, you can't downplay a guy that had 700 yards last year in the Big Ten. Okay, he did. And he wasn't doing that against cupcake Pac-12 competition or whatever. He was doing it in the Big Ten. So I think that he is going to be the one that steers the ship early on and totes the water for the receiving corps until these young pups get going. And when they get going, it's going to be special. But I think he's going to be the dude, along with a guy like Rivaldo Fairweather, that Peyton Thorne relies on. And then, as we mentioned earlier, in the room, I think he's going to be big in the room. I saw a picture that was tweeted out 2 days ago with Perry Thompson, Cam Coleman, and KLS on the field, on the practice field, stretching together just 2 days ago, getting acclimated to each other. I think that's going to be big.
Love that.
And I think that's going to be why his impact's going to be felt. I really do.
Love that a ton. And we had similar thought processes here. Your number 2 was Cam Coleman. My number 2 was KLS. My number 4 is Cam Coleman. And I do think that for the running game I talked about, the floor is going to be there, right? For the passing game, KLS is helping you raise the floor, him and Peyton Thorne. That's why I had them 1 and 2. And then Cam Coleman's definitely that ceiling. And being able to use the body control, the speed, the height, make plays downfield, I think is the biggest place where he can have an impact on Auburn. But Cam Coleman, the amount of time it takes him to ramp up to being comfortable in college against Power 5 competition, that will determine the ceiling of Auburn's offense in 2024, I think, is provided you can just get stability at quarterback. And with KeAndre Lambert-Smith, I think Cam Coleman's your X factor there. So I've got him at 4 simply because I'm more worried about the floor raising than I am about the ceiling, but I do think it's definitely going to be there. Who is your number 5, real quick, before we go to break?
Yeah, I had a hard time with this between this player and Rivaldo Fairweather, but at the end of the day, I chose Jeremiah Cobb. And the reason why I chose Cobb is because I think he is going to be dynamic in different facets of the offense. I think offensively, he can obviously get carries for you, get big plays, but I also think Auburn's going to use him a lot out of the backfield as a receiver and receptions, wheel routes, swing passes, that kind of thing. We've already seen him use with that jet sweep toss that they run. So I think he's going to get more touches in positions to be very explosive. And because of that, I have him as number 5. Yeah.
And similar kind of note, I have Jarquez Hunter at number 5. One of those, he is the leader of the running back room. He is the de facto starter unless it happens. And hopefully with a full unbroken offseason where he can be around the team and get ready and everything, I hope he has a big year. If there's a 1,000-yard rusher on the team, it's Jarquez Hunter. And if he's able to keep enough carries and do well enough to hit 1,000 yards, I do think that unlocks a different level of Auburn's offense. I just don't necessarily know if they're going to run the ball enough to do that. Or if they will, won't need to run the ball enough to do that. If you have to give him the ball 25 times a game, 30 times a game, I think there's a little concern about what's happening in the passing game. But I do have Jarquez Hunter number 5. So to kind of recap real quick, Darrell, you were Jarquez Hunter number 1, Cam Coleman 2, Peyton Thorne 3, KeAndre Lambert-Smith 4, and Jeremiah Cobb 5. I was Peyton Thorne number 1, KeAndre Lambert-Smith number 2, Connor Lew at center number 3, Cam Coleman at 4, Jarquez Hunter at 5. If you guys have a different order you think these should be in, let us know down in the comments. We'll want to kind of see from you and hear from you. When we come back, we're going to get the defense and talk about the 5 most impactful defensive players for 2024. We'll do that next right here on Locked on Auburn. Final segment of the Wednesday show, Lindsay Crosby, Darrell Dapprich filling in for Zac Blackerby, who is in international waters. Hopefully he stops by the duty-free shop for the two of us on the way back. as a thank you for this. But
Yeah.
talking about, most impactful players on defense. We don't have as much time, obviously, on
Right.
this, but who are some of your guys that you want to watch for? Like, these guys have to have good seasons for Auburn's defense to play to their potential.
Sure, I'll throw out some names, not necessarily rank them, but Jason Jones I think he's an anchor along the defensive front. I think that he's going to be able to really set the tone if he gets a lot of double teams for some of these new defensive tackles, defensive linemen like Bleedy and Rakes to really prosper. I think it all starts with Jason Jones. And I've been seeing how hard he's been working in the offseason, some of the films with his workout sessions and all that. So I think he is an automatic leader and a big impactful player along the defensive front.
I am right there with you on that.
Yeah.
If he can consistently take up 2 blockers every single play, I think, one, obviously what that does to the run game, but then also what that does for some of the pass rushers, for Jalen McLeod, for a Keldrick Falk, some of these guys that can get after the passer, maybe a Jamonta Wall, just plenty of guys. I do think Jason Jones is probably the most important defensive lineman for Auburn this year. It was tough with Keldrick Falk, but I do think it's Jason Jones, and I'm primed for him to have a huge season before he goes on to the NFL.
Yeah, and I had Keldrick Falk as well. I just think it's time for him to take that next step. All the tools are in the tool bag, and he's got all the intangibles, and I'm ready to see him take that next step. And I just feel like he's ready to make that impact and be a menace on that defensive line.
Yeah, I have Eugene Asante here. It was like him and then Keldrick Falk. And Falk, a lot of the same reasons you mentioned. I think this could be the year where he ends up being kind of dominant. But for me, Eugene Asante has been the type of linebacker that you felt like Auburn was missing the last few seasons. You thought you were going to have that Noah Papo. He had some injury issues. It kind of stopped him from getting back to that form. But part of the whole idea of having a redshirt senior in Jason Jones, a big body, taking up multiple blockers, is it can free up guys like Eugene Asante to knife through the line, make a stop for a loss, track a back down in the flat, things like that. And the more he's able to play without having to navigate traffic, and he can just go see ball, hit ball, and wreck some havoc, I think that does a lot for this defense, especially with Ron Roberts, or especially not with Ron Roberts, especially with the way that this defense is typically called and coordinated, how you don't really know what the linebackers are doing on any given play. He's the most versatile where he can kind of do everything. And so can definitely change a lot of things in that DJ Durkin defense if Eugene Asante can have a big year.
Yeah, I had Asante too. So you've said everything I wanted to say. So I'll go on to some we hadn't mentioned because I had him on the list. Keontae Scott. This is a guy that was rumored to be in the portal, and he pulled his name out. He's moving to the outside as of now, and is going to be a corner that's an outside corner. So how does that look? What does that look like? He feels confident that he can be that shutdown corner that Auburn needs. And I feel like if he is, and if he does that, and they're able to bring Kite off the bench because you got Kane Lee on the other side, if Keontae Scott can have the kind of year that Auburn, the defensive backfields coach and the defensive coordinator, DJ Durkin, feels like he could have, that defense and that defensive secondary is going to be elite. But it has to start with Keontae Scott, in my opinion.
Yeah, I struggled with Keontae Scott versus Kane Lee, and I think it's, to me, oftentimes that number 2 cornerback spot ends up kind of being big because your number 1, you kind of count on that guy to lock down the opposing team's best receiver, right? But we've seen so many quarterbacks, so many offenses. Let me go back up a little bit. So many offenses have multiple guys that they trust to get the ball. And your teams are not afraid to go pick on that number 2 corner. And if he can step up and be consistent and reliable and be really a veteran out there as the other outside cornerback, I think that does a lot for Auburn as far as being able to move around who ends up playing the star and gives you some flexibility to not have to worry personnel wise because you're not having to cover for one of your outside guys. So I love Keontae Scott. I just kind of assume he's going to be amazing this year. That's probably not fair to him, but I just assume he's fine. And to me, the big thing, K and Lee's got to be able to hold his own as a starter from day one on the outside so that there's not that weak point where an opposing wide receiver can attack.
If he holds down his end of the bargain, like you're saying, and shuts down his side of the field and people stop throwing at him, you won't notice him. It'll be hard to say, how impactful is that guy? He's got no stats, but that's still impactful, right? Yeah. If he's shutting down one side of the field and they're going at K and Lee or Antonio Kite, or whoever, the nickel, whatever you want to call it, it should be pretty interesting. My last dude is a guy that I think is just going to have a monster year, All-American type season, and that's Jalen McLeod. I feel it in my bones. I read it in the tea leaves. I think he is going to eat this year. And I think he'll be the most impactful defensive player that Auburn has.
Mine might be a little bit of wishful thinking, my number 5, but Dorian Maiusi. We talked about Eugene Asante. Obviously, we know he's going to be a stud. Who's that second guy? I've seen people talk about Austin Keys. I've seen people talk about freshman DeMarcus Riddick. There's been talk about Robert Woodyard. Somebody has to be that reliable number 2 guy. And Maiusi has the most experience of anybody in the room. Yes, he's new, but he's got plenty of experience, plenty of, again, college tenure. He's seen a lot of this stuff. The concepts are familiar to him. And so he should be able to come in and provide a floor at the number 2 linebacker position. So Dorian Maiusi, to me, is going to have an impactful year. And if you can have studs at all 3 levels, that makes it so much harder to move the ball reliably on this Auburn defense. Anything else on this list real quick, Darrell, you want to kind of touch on?
I had a hard time keeping Keiron Crawford off this list. I really did. I just think he's going to be a really good player, a bookend to McLeod. I think Key Crawford is a great sneaky get for Auburn. And, I like what you're talking about with the linebackers. Is it Austin Keys? Is it Maiusi? And then K and Lee's a tough one to leave off too. But, you have to cut the list off at some point. So, again, that bodes well for what the roster, what the roster looks like now. That you have a hard time, that you leave off a guy like Fairweather on the offensive impactful side. So the roster reconstruction that Hugh Freeze has done the last 2 years, it bodes well for the way that it sets up because there's good players that we left off our top 5. Very well said, Darrell. How can folks follow you, more of what you're doing, your Auburn content and Auburn takes? Sure. Well, I do a lot on X still, DAP6410, Monday mornings. I'm with Ben Taylor on WANI. Tuesday afternoons, Jacob Goins on the line, usually with Zach on Wednesdays and Fridays. This week, a lot more with you. And then I am going to write an article by the end of this week. Now that the Auburn basketball roster looks set, I'll be writing one for Auburn Daily, kind of a deep dive into the Auburn roster. Let's go with that. I'm on Twitter at Crosby Baseball. You can find all of my written work, auburndaily.com when it comes to Auburn, and then bravestoday.com when it comes to the Atlanta Braves. Until next time, this has been Locked on Auburn.